Today we are on part 3 and hopefully the last part of obstacles along the path. If you're just joining us today and you haven't seen the 2 previous talks on this topic, please go back. They're on the YouTube channel. Please go back and pick up at the beginning, so this all kind of fits into a bigger context and makes sense. So just very, very quickly to get started, to recap, is that we are on a journey, each and every one of us. We are on a journey of self-discovery, and that's self with a capital S, a big S, the self. In some teachings they call it self-realization. We are awakening to the fact that we are spiritual beings. We are growing every day in that experience, in that knowledge, and this is what we refer to as the path. The path. We are on a path of getting back to the garden representing the place where we lived in conscious awareness of the presence of God. This is our path. We are born into this world that believes in the duality of good and evil. We are born into this world that believes in materialism. We are born into the world that believes in separation. And what we are doing is we are journeying our way back to the unity, to the oneness, to the singularity, to the perfect love. Love being the experience of unity, the perfect love that is God. And as we discussed, in the journey, in the hero's journey, as Joseph Campbell laid it out, he looked at different mythologies, and this idea of a journey and seeking and finding, this is laid out in mythologies around the world. And he gave us stages of that journey. And now, what we have to remember, like when we are watching a movie or we are reading a book, and I loved it especially when I was a young boy, we actually had books that you read and pages that you turned and things like that. As we become engaged in that story, we become the protagonist. In a good story, we are not just observing the story. I think I told you, since I started to learn how to direct TV programs, I can't watch a show anymore like I used to, because I'm looking at the lighting, I'm looking at the camera angles, I'm analyzing everything, but I'm not engaged in it, I'm observing it. And when we are engaged in a good story, we become that protagonist, right? That's when the storyteller has done a good job, we become the protagonist. We identify with them. We are anticipating their next move. It is us, it is us who is doing it. And this is why it is so important. You'll see in today's culture, it's so important that we have heroes in the stories who represent different people, who look like different people, so that all different people, kids of all sizes and shapes and colors, they can look at that hero and they can say, yes, that's me, you see. And what the story does is we become engaged in it, and it helps us to start to think that way and to move forward in that way. And I mentioned a couple weeks ago that even if you look at the legends of the Knights of the Round Table, King Arthur's Knights of the Round Table, these are mythological stories about our quest for the soul, our quest to discover our soul. The Holy Grail is not the chalice used at the Last Supper. As it is portrayed, it is a symbol. But it is about our search for our own soul, our search for our experience of our spiritual identity. And what Campbell laid out for us along this journey then is that the hero, you and I, the protagonist, we're living in our ordinary world, experiencing our ordinary life, getting up and going to work in an ordinary day, doing all the ordinary things that people do. And then the hero begins to awaken to some type of a call. You see, there's something that the hero needs to go do. And the hero rejects that call. Right? This is you and I. You know, the little voice in the back of our head says, you know, you are a beautiful spiritual being. Awaken to that. And we go, nah, I can't be me. I can't be here. You're not talking to me, God. You're talking to somebody else. You see, we kind of reject it. But at some point, we can no longer refuse. At some point, we can no longer walk away from it. And as we begin the journey in earnest, we meet mentors. This is part of the hero's journey. If you haven't looked it up yet, please go on the internet and research Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey. He's written many books on the subject. There's some programs on Netflix and Amazon, both, I believe. Many lectures on YouTube. But look at Campbell's work and understand that he is telling us how the mythologies of the world have laid out this journey of the soul seeking to discover itself. And along the way, we meet mentors. We meet people who are going to give us the lay of the land, so to speak. They're going to tell us, now, when you get here, this is what's going to happen. When you get there, this is what's going to happen. There's an obstacle here, and there's a way around that obstacle. You know, sometimes it's a riddle that has to be solved, and the mentor gives the protagonist the key to the riddle. You know, how to solve the riddle. And finally, you know, later on in the story, they find themselves in that very situation that was foretold, and then finally they remember, that's the key that the mentor gave me. So on our spiritual journey, excuse me, the mentors have gone before us, and they've given us roadmaps. They've given us different roadmaps for the growth of the soul. They've given us different disciplines. They've given us different spiritual practices. They've given us different books to read and poems to read, and prayers to engage in, and all kinds of things. And if you look at the history of the world, and if you look at the history of spiritual growth, it runs the gamut. I mean, it runs the gamut from sitting, for example, in a cave and staring at a wall in meditation for years, you know, to sweat lodges and fasting and things that spirit quest and things, sleep denial, and all of these things that kind of what they do is they get our monkey mind out of the way. It gets confused and it gets out of the way. Someone posted a meme this morning. I was looking at Facebook, and someone posted a quote, and it was from an Indian sage, and it said, you know, where is the Atman? Where is the presence of the divine within us? And it says, when thinking stops, there it is. And so our mind, as we were talking last week, our intellect gets in the way. It wants to understand. It's one of the obstacles. So the sages have gone before us, and they've laid out practices, and they have also laid out, excuse me, why I didn't mean to touch my face, but I did. They've showed us the obstacles, and that's what we've been talking about for the last several weeks. So last week we talked about the first, which is, and I might want to say, I use the term obstacles here, but they're sometimes called impediments, and they're sometimes called the poisons. The poisons. So we're on this journey. The mentors have shown us the way. They have told us what the obstacles are, and we are trying to become more aware of those obstacles, so that as we encounter them in our day-to-day life, as we encounter them on our journey, because in reality our day-to-day life is our journey, we can recognize them and we can know what to do. So last week we talked about the first. If you want to do some research on these, in the Eastern traditions, they're called the 5 kleshas, Kleshas. And again, as with anything you look up on the internet, you're going to find a lot of stuff that just people were just typing stuff, hoping you to land on their page. So try to find some, some reputable teachers, some reputable books on the topic. But the first one we talked about, and kind of the root cause of all of the others, excuse me, was a lack of spiritual understanding. We try to understand things with our human intellect. We like to analyze things. We like to divide things. We like to take a whole and break it down into small pieces. And then if we think we can understand the label for a piece and put it off in a pigeonhole, we think we understand it. And of course we don't. We understand the label that we put on it. And we don't understand it as a whole. We only understand it as little pieces. And this is important because it served us well in our human evolution. The purpose of the human evolution then is to keep us as a race, to keep us alive, the human race, to keep us alive until we could get to the point where we could discover our spiritual nature. Along the way, we had to analyze things. We had to identify things. We had to quickly determine if something was a friend or a foe. We had to quickly decide fight or flight. And all those things were necessary from the point of view of the human evolution. But now we have reached a point where that which got us here can't take us any further. That which got us here can in fact be holding us back. Many of the things that we have decided as human beings, many of the things that we have decided along the path were not true at all, but it didn't matter because they weren't involved in a life or death decision, So for example, if we looked at a particular food and we decided that that food was no good and we didn't eat it, really didn't matter if the food was good or not. As long as we had enough other food to live, it didn't matter. If you're not eating the red berries, even if red berries are okay, it didn't matter, you see. So the process by which the intellect decides things is very far from perfect. But as long as we stay alive, it's okay. And now we are at the point where we have to recognize, as I said just a little bit ago, is that which got us here can't take us the rest of the way. This is walking the razor's edge. We use the intellect to tell us that there's a place where the intellect can't go. And then we have to go there. And as we go there, we can't take the intellect with us because the intellect does not work. The intellect cannot function there. And now we move to the second big obstacle, which is a creation of the intellect, at least in the way I understand it, and that's called the ego. Now, the way that I'm using the ego here, and of course you're going to find different definitions and different authors that you read. So the way that I am using it here is, it is the collection of ideas about who we are and the way things ought to be. That is what I am referring to the ego. It is a self-identity, I think some psychologists might call it. Who do we think we are? So we go by our name, So if I ask people, who are you, they'll typically give me their name. But is that who they are, or is that the name their parents gave them, or even the name that they've chosen for themselves as they go through life? That's not who they are. That's just a title. That's just something that they are called, you see. And if we keep pushing and we try to get to people, we all have this opinion, and it's just an opinion, right? Just an opinion about who we are and the way things ought to be and what our value system is, and all of those things that kind of go into this little bubble, if you want to think of it as a bubble, this little bubble of Jim, this little bubble of who Jim thinks he is. Now the intellect likes to be right. So if we go through life and we form an opinion about this is the way something is, we tend to defend that. We tend to put a lot of energy into defending that because we want to be right. The intellect wants to be right. And in fact, many of the things that we invest a lot of energy in They're not right. They're just an opinion. They're just an opinion that we formed perhaps a long, long time ago. But yet we become vested in being right. And then the ego becomes vested in defending, fighting, struggling in order to prove, in order to maintain this idea of being right. So one of the ways that I explain it is, consider that the ego thinks that if you change, the ego thinks that if something that you believe to be right, if you go against that, you're going to die. The ego's going to die. And its greatest fear is becoming extinct, right? Going into oblivion. So for example, if you grew up in a culture that said, don't eat the red berries, what we were using as an example before, and suddenly you found that red berries were the only thing that you had to eat, it would be extremely difficult for you to take that red berry. You wouldn't take it. Because the ego acts as if its job is to keep you alive. And it thinks that everything the intellect tells it is the gospel truth. And therefore it struggles constantly to protect you. It is trying to protect you. But in reality, it's not protecting you. It is protecting its idea of you. It's not protecting the real you. It's protecting this persona that it has created as to who and what you are. Now, a big part of the ego experience as we're defining it here today is this belief in separation, this belief of apartness, this belief that I am me and you are you, and God is out there over there somewhere. If there is a God, God is out there over there somewhere far, far away. And everyone and everything is separate. Excuse me. And the very life we lead is a life of separation, right? So this is the idea of leaving the garden. There was a time when we knew that we were one, and one being altogether, unity. And now we have moved into this belief of separation, this idea of separation. Now this is an obstacle along the path, because the path is a path that takes us past this idea of separation. Right? It is a path that dissolves this idea of separation. It is a path that brings us back to the experience of unity. And as I said in the opening treatment, we are not our brother's keeper. We are our brother. We have compassion and empathy for each and every person who is suffering in this world today. Because we are part of them, they are part of us. Even people whose ideology we may not like, even people who may be our self-professed enemies. We are one with them. They are one with us. And this journey of spiritual awakening, this journey of spiritual growth, is this journey of dissolving or moving beyond this idea of separation, this idea of oneness, this idea that we are one apart from every other. So one of the things that we can do then, as we go along, we say, well, what can we do about these things, is become aware of when you are entrenched in your analytical opinions, and say to yourself, well, that's just an opinion, you see. I mean, how many times have you heard people get into a great discussion and they say, well, it just makes sense, Well, I'm sorry, but just because it makes sense doesn't mean it's true or it's right. Look at all of the things that in the past have made sense to people that are just absolutely wrong. Just absolutely wrong. But the intellect tries to defend itself, tries to be right. And then the ego tries to fight for it, you see. So if you catch yourself, if you catch yourself being kind of enamored with your own ideas or your own opinion of who you are, you know, I'm not like those people over there kind of stuff, that's a perfect opportunity to catch yourself living your separation, living your apartness. Now, one of the most effective spiritual practices for breaking this ego idea down is compassion. Can we take time to recognize that each and every human being has kind of the same wants, the same desires, the same fears as we do? Emma Curtis Hopkins says everybody in the world moves because they're pursuing their idea of good. Now, everybody's idea of good may be slightly different than everybody else's, but nevertheless, we are all trying to find and fulfill that which is good. So we can start with compassion, and if we find ourselves lacking compassion for a particular situation, for a particular group of people, that is our opportunity to grow and to be still and to sit and to know that we are one. We are one. The other thing that we can do that I sometimes find helpful is to really come to this understanding. Right? Remember, the first obstacle is a lack of spiritual understanding. So when it comes to this idea of, well, who am I? You know, if whatever I am is not what my ego thinks I am, then who am I? Then what am I? Is if we can come to the spiritual understanding that there's one life, the divine, spirit, God, love, nature, whatever you choose to call it, and it is expressing itself as its creation. It is perfect unity expressing itself as multiplicity. And what that means then is that no matter what I think I am, no matter what my ego tells me I am, the spiritual understanding is essentially I am not, but the divine is. The divine is expressing itself as me. I am, or that which I think I am, is nothing more than a persona, a costume, a mask that the divine is wearing and expressing through. That's not to belittle the importance of who and what we are. See, once you say that, the ego gets frightened. You know, you say, "What do you mean I'm not?" Of course I am. I can't imagine a world in which I'm not. No, it's just shifting the frame a little bit. It says that it is the divine as me. It is the divine as me. It is the divine through me. See, then our life starts to take on a whole different tack. Instead of it being about me getting what I want and doing the things I need to do to live, see, then it becomes about me, the persona, the instrument of God's peace, cooperating with this flow of love through me, cooperating with this activity of God as me. So sometimes what is helpful in bringing down this ego, of course, now meditation is an important spiritual practice that helps us to understand that ideas are just ideas and we don't have to engage them, and it helps us to break through the ego. But in our daily life, we can also say the love of God as, and then say your name. So the love of God as Jim, the love of God as me is now doing this. Right? The love of God as me is accomplishing this today. The love of God as me is reaching out. You know, one of the most beautiful ideas that that I ever came across is that God loves you by means of me. God loves me by means of you. And if we really get that picture, then we can say it is the very love of God passing through me that reaches out as love. I hope you sense that difference. It's not me. I am not doing this. In the words of Jesus, he said, it's not me, it's the Father within me. It's the love within me. It is the presence within me. Excuse me. So this is kind of awakening to the spiritual magnificence within. Right? Awakening to the fact that the very presence, the omnipresence, the very presence of the divine is here acting through me. And I want to get my thinking out of the way. I want to get my opinions out of the way. In the words of Emerson, I want to get my bloated nothingness, my ego, out of the way. And just let love be love as me and through me. So if you catch yourself getting engaged in feelings of right and wrong and winning and being angry and all these kind of things, which is easy to do in this environment that we're in, because the TV is always trying to push those buttons for us. Ask yourself, what part is getting angry? What part is becoming engaged? And usually it's the ego. Okay? And then what I like to say to myself is, well, that's just a big load of ego crap. Let it go. Let it go. Leave it alone. Now the next two obstacles sort of go together, so we're going to try to cover them both at the same time. And this is what is called grasping and aversion. Grasping and aversion. I think it's important to keep in mind that what is moving us all forward, what we are all seeking, if you want to put it in terms of seeking, is fulfillment. We wish to experience fulfillment. But we're not exactly sure how to do that. We're not exactly sure where to go. Our intellect analyzes things. Our ego tries to defend us and protect us. And it tries to accumulate, it tries to grasp the things that it mistakenly, right? Remember, the intellect is not always right. The things that it mistakenly thinks are going to be fulfilling. So we are seeking fulfillment. Perhaps another term is happiness. We are seeking happiness, as the Dalai Lama would put it. But along the way, what happens is we confuse pleasure with happiness. We think that the things that we experience that are pleasurable are the things that will make us happy. And we try to hoard them. We try to accumulate them. We try to bring more of them into our lives. Doesn't matter whether it's your food or your favorite people. We try to accumulate them. We think that if we surround ourselves with these tokens of pleasure, that somehow we will be happy. And of course, what we find out is that we have mistaken, right? Remember, the first obstacle is lack of spiritual understanding. We have mistaken happiness for pleasure, or we have mistaken pleasure for happiness. So what happens is, and you can see this, think of the example of money. People work and work and work and work and work to accumulate money. And there's nothing wrong with money, and there's nothing wrong with having enough and plenty. That should be a normal, natural part of our life. But you can see people who can't get enough of it. People who have more money than you and I could ever possibly spend, and yet they're trying to figure out ways to get more. So if you don't have any money, $1 million is a lot. If you have $1 million, and well, it's not as much as $20 million. Maybe I need $20 million. And if you have 20, it's not as much as 40. You can see, for example, in the salaries of some of our professional athletes. So some of them are making, excuse me, fistfuls of money, and they're just fine until somebody in another team makes more, and then all of a sudden they've got to have more because now the ego's involved. You see, now the ego is involved. Well, I should be worth more than so and so, or are you telling me I'm not worth as much as so and so? So we can see that we find something that gives us pleasure and we grasp to it. And as we are grasping to it, as we are trying to accumulate more and more and more of it, excuse me, we find that which we thought was going to bring us happiness, it actually brings us suffering. This is one of the principal tenets of Buddhism. That which we seek for pleasure ultimately brings us suffering. Because what happens if I lose it? What happens if I don't have enough? Now I've got to spend all my time trying to get more of it. Think of, for example, if you've ever known anyone who's been addicted to a substance, that substance dominates their life. They started with it because they thought it was going to make them happy. But after a while, they become a slave to it. Their whole life is oriented towards getting enough and keeping enough. And what happens if they can't get any more, and all those kind of things. It's a perfect example of that which we thought would bring us happiness has brought us pain and has brought us suffering. So we want to look at our lives. We want to go through our lives. Right? So remember I said your life is your practice. We want to go through our lives, and as we go through our lives, say, what am I attached to? What am I trying to get more of? Is there something that I am so identified with that I think if I didn't have it, I wouldn't feel whole, I wouldn't feel complete, And an easy way to judge it is I love watching the TV commercials. I guess the Rolling Stones in a song a long time ago, made fun of it, and they said, the TV says that man can't be a man because he doesn't smoke the same cigarettes as me. If you look at the TV is constantly giving us this false equivalence, If you buy this product, then you will be that. You will be something so much better. If you pay too much for something, you'll have to go hide your face and live in shame. So don't pay too much by our product, those kind of things. And they're giving us all of these these things that we identify with and we attach to, and we don't want to go through life being ashamed that we paid too much for something. So we're going to be sharp. We're going to give them our money instead. But look at your own life. What is it right now? There was a teacher in the East who used to ask people, if I asked you what you're afraid I'm going to tell you most that you have to do for your spiritual growth, what would that be? And then he tells them to go do it. So in your own life, if I asked you or I told you to think of the one thing that you just absolutely would not want to give up on, to let go of, what would that be? And then ask yourself if grasping to that is an obstacle along your way. Because in the end, we don't take any of this with us. We take our consciousness, we take our love, but our possessions will remain behind. Now the flip side of grasping is aversion, right? Pain and pleasure, pain and pleasure. We want to do that which we think is pleasure, but it doesn't lead to happiness. Now another way to think of happiness before I leave it is, what is happiness and what truly makes you happy? Important question to explore on your spiritual path. We're not going to have time to answer it today. But aversion is the things that we avoid, the things that we don't want to do. And sometimes the things that we avoid may be giving us our greatest opportunity to grow and our greatest opportunity to learn. Why are we trying to avoid them? Why are we trying to move away from them? So remember I said when we were covering the seven main aspects of God, there's one aspect of God that's going to appeal to you, and that's the one that you go to first. And then there's going to be one that does not appeal to you, and that's the one that's going to represent your greatest growth. What is it that you're avoiding? What is it that you don't want to do? What is the hardest thing? Sometimes I talk about let's love our enemies, and people say it's hard to do. It is hard to do. But it's a wonderful opportunity for growth. Take that one for example. Why is it hard to love the people who hate us? Well, it's because we believe in separation. If we understood unity, if we understood that the presence of God and the love of God is within each and every one, and we could work with ourselves to see that and experience it, it wouldn't be so hard, you see. That's just an example. It's just one example of when we look at that which is the most difficult for us, that which we are avoiding, the one thing that if I told you had to do in order to grow, that you would say, oh, please, not that. No, not that. That might be the one that is going to help you the most. Now, all of these things require self-awareness. They require self-consciousness. So, I mean self-conscious, not in the sense of feeling guilt or shame or inadequacy, but I mean just being aware. What are these ideas that I am so in love with that I want to be right? What is this idea of who and what I am that I'm afraid to let go of? Because once I realize that the intellect isn't always right, then I have to admit that the intellect's opinion of who I am and what I am, the ego, it may not be right either. That could be scary. What am I trying to hold on to? What am I trying to avoid? All of these things are kind of clues. You see, these are the kind of things the mentor said, you're gonna run into this along the way. But you have to pay attention. You have to be aware. Now the last obstacle we'll talk about is fear. And the biggest fear, the root of all fears, is the fear of death. If we are going through this thing called life, and we are carrying with us a fear of death, then we are not living. We are not totally living. Everything that we do because we are saddled with this fear, everything that we do is kind of an illusion, a necessary illusion. What we're trying to do is we're trying to pretend that it's not there. Here, in this situation that we're in the world right now, it's hard to ignore the fact that the death of the physical body occurs. It happens. People are sick, people are dying. We're not trying to make light of it. We're trying to say it's, impermanence. It is impermanence. In some of the Buddhist teachings, they would have the monks go sit at the burning grounds where the bodies were burned and sit there and meditate for days until they got it. They got it, you see. This experience is not a permanent experience. It's not supposed to be a permanent experience. Excuse me. So if we go through life trying to ignore it or trying to create situations that never let us come to the complete embrace, the complete understanding that we're all temporary here. We're all just passing through, and that's the way it is, and that's the way it's supposed to be. We have to get over that fear, and part of that fear is the fear of oblivion. Right? So the ego would hate to be stamped out. The ego says, "Oh my God, if there's nothing after death, well then the ego is gone, and can't live knowing that. See, so we have to come to some type of a spiritual understanding. We have to come back to, right? Why would we fear death? Well, we fear death because we don't fully understand what it is spiritually. A part of life, just a part of life. We're not afraid of life. Why should we be afraid of the part of life that's known as death? So if we are afraid of death, we can never truly enter into love. We can never truly enter into anything, because the relationships that we're trying to create are relationships that are designed to help us ignore the fact that someday we will die. Someday we will die. We think, oh, if I love you, then when I'm gone, there'll be somebody here to mourn me. Well, maybe not. Maybe in 100 years, everybody's gone, So we do these things. You hear about people talking about, their legacy, what their legacy is. I mean, just think about it. Think about it. How many people passed through this plane and left us 100 years ago, and nobody remembers what their legacy is. Very few of them. Very few. So we do all of these things to try to create this fake world to live in because of fear. Because of fear. And so Alan Cohen, in his book Joy Is Your Compass, he says, what would you be doing if you knew everything was going to turn out all right? When you're faced with your fear, what would you be doing if you knew that everything was going to turn out all right? And remember, fear is just an idea. So what would we be doing if we knew that everything was going to turn out all right? This then brings us back to our spiritual understanding. Right? Life is the very process that has animated the matter that we call the human body. And it is constantly renewing it. It is constantly restoring it. It is constantly tearing it down and building it back up again. Constantly. And knows how to do that without you and I ever thinking about it. And when it is finished with this body, it allows the elements, the chemicals, the minerals, and those sorts of things to completely break down so they can reform in some other shape or form. You see this clearly if you live in an environment like I live in, where the vegetation is plush. The tree falls to the ground and more trees sprout from the trunk. The previous owners here planted a row of hedges for some reason straight across the middle of the backyard, separating the backyard into two pieces. I've been here 7 years now, and I keep trying to cut them down to reclaim the yard, and in a few months they're back up again. Life just constantly is recycling itself. It is reforming itself. And what we must come to realize is that the consciousness, the part of us that truly is, just simply recycles and reforms into a new experience, into another adventure. As I said last week, when our children are born, we think, oh, how lucky are we that we're born. We never think about where they came from, and there might be people on the other side there who are saying, oh, where did they go? Where did they go? See? So we have to understand that this very thing called life was never born and shall never die. It is. And it takes on different shapes. It takes on different forms. It enters into different experiences of itself for the purpose of knowing itself in some unique way as us and through us. See? And that's what we are. That's what we are. We are these spiritual adventurers, as Holmes tells us, in the unexplored territory of mind. So there's nothing for us to fear. There's nothing for us to fear, because we are part of that which was never born and part of that which shall never die, but will just constantly find new ways to express itself. So again, your life is your opportunity for growth, right? When is it that you experience a fear? What is it that you're afraid of? And that fear comes from a belief in separation. And if you knew that there was no separation between yourself and omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence, there could be nothing to be afraid of. And when you find yourself being afraid of death, ask yourself, what am I afraid of? I love the way the Dalai Lama put this. He was doing a lecture one time, maybe a book I read, and somebody asked him a question. He says, well, think about it this way. He says, there's two possibilities. One possibility is that when you die, everything stops, your consciousness ceases to exist, and there's nothing, whatever you were is completely gone. He says, and if that's the case, then there's nothing to worry about because you won't be there to worry. The consciousness is completely extinguished, any possibility of fear is gone, and that's it. So why worry, you know? The other possibility is your consciousness continues, and it continues to grow, and it continues to evolve, and it continues to develop. So wouldn't the reasonable thing right here and right now be to learn how to allow your consciousness to grow, to allow your consciousness to evolve, and to allow your consciousness to, so that when your consciousness moves to a different experience, you can continue on your path, you can continue on your growth. So either there's absolutely nothing to worry about either way, right? Absolutely nothing. Because we are on this path, we are on this journey. We are constantly discovering more of what the love of God as us is. And God's love is perfect. That which is able to create the entire universe out of the nothingness of the energy that it is, knows how to care for itself as you and I, whether we are in this body or another, or another, or another, forever and ever, spiraling upward into a deeper experience of love. So I invite you to examine your own life. We probably have lots of time to do it now that everybody's home, or most people are home. Examine your life and ask yourself, where might I experience these obstacles, and what am I willing to do to move beyond them? Am I willing to sit in meditation, to allow the monkey mind to stop, to allow the ego to dissolve, to allow myself to enter into the experience of oneness? Am I willing to challenge my ideas when my opinions come up and I have the need to be right? Am I willing to step back and let my bloated nothingness get out of the way when my ego gets angry and wants to rise up and fight to protect me? What am I trying to hold on to? What am I trying to avoid? Am I afraid of death? These are key things to explore as we are all on this path together. Let's be grateful for those wonderful teachers who have gone before us, who have laid out the map, who have told us where we might expect to find trouble, and have shown us the way around it. We are all working our way back to the garden. And it is beautiful. And so it is.